Today we're going to talk about 5 things that you should keep in mind when writing the first draft of your first ever novel. The first thing that you should keep in mind is that it's probably, unless you're an amazing writer right out the gate, it's probably going to be bad, and that's totally normal. You're going to want to go back and read. You're going to finish the first chapter, you're going to read it, and you're going to think, that is not great. And that's okay. Your first draft, A, isn't supposed to be good anyway, and B, it's the first time you've ever written, so you need practice. You need to write. And you should resist the urge to go back and rewrite that first chapter. Because if you don't, you can get stuck in an ever-ending editing loop. All right. The second thing you should keep in mind is that you can start with an outline, but you don't have to. And if you do start with an outline, you should resist the urge to make changes to the outline as you're writing your story. Okay, I say this because the most important thing about your first draft of your first novel is that you finish it. You're proving to yourself that you can take a story and finish it. And if you keep changing your outline, the likelihood of you finishing that story goes way down. And it's not that you can't change your outline, but if you make one change, you're way more likely to make a ton of changes just as you go. And that's not necessarily, that's not conducive to actually finishing the novel. So I will say I think it's okay to make minor changes to your outline if you haven't already written it yet, written the part that you want to change. If you can make that change quickly and it doesn't cut into your writing time, I think that that's fine. But also, who cares what I think? I'm just some guy on the internet, so it doesn't really matter what I think. It matters what you think. But just keep these things in mind as you're writing. If you make a ton of changes, you're less likely to finish your novel. Also, your final draft becomes your outline anyway, and that's whether you're an outliner or a discovery writer. The final first draft is just a really long outline with a lot of words, and that's really what you should look at and really what you should change in the editing process to make your story a lot better. Okay, your first draft isn't going to read like a masterpiece, whether you're professional or just an amateur like me, you know. The likelihood of your first draft being a masterpiece is just really low. A lot of authors make their story in the editing process. So the third thing that you should keep in mind is that if you don't need all of the elements of your story to start writing. And this is really the discovery process. This is what discovery writers do. They'll start with an idea or a character or a setting, and they'll write the rest of their... They find their story as they go. They write themselves into the missing elements of their story. This is a perfectly legitimate way to write a story. Writing your story, if you do it this way, there's going to be some heavy lifting in the back end in the editing process because there will be missing elements of that story, which is fine. You won't find everything as you go. That's like that with outliners too. Outliners just tend to cover more of their bases in the first draft than discovery writers do, and that's totally fine. The most important thing is that you just write. Whether you're outlining or discovery writing, it's important to keep any ideas that you have as you're writing written down in a separate file. So let's say you're outlining and you think, oh, it'd be really cool if this happened. I think that you should open up a separate file on your computer, and write down every idea that you have. I think you should do that, especially if you're discovery writing your story, because that allows you to keep these ideas saved, but you don't have to use them until you get to the end, and you can look at your story and think, oh, this actually is a good idea. This would be really cool if I did this. But that allows you to actually push through and finish the story rather than going back and getting stuck in that editing loop. The fourth thing that you should keep in mind when writing your story is that it really doesn't matter where you start. You don't even have to write the story in order. First of all, you can start in the middle and then write till the end, or start in the middle, write a little bit, and then go jump to the front and then start writing there. So scrap the order. The order doesn't necessarily matter. If you do want to write it chronologically, don't worry too much about where you're starting. You can always go back and change the start anyway. A lot of writers will throw out their first 1 to 2, sometimes 3 chapters anyway, because they've decided to write themselves into a story, and as they've done that, they've realized at the end that they've started in the wrong spot. They've started too early in the story. If you can write yourself into missing elements of your story, you can certainly edit yourself into a good starting spot for your story. The fifth and final thing, probably the most important thing that you should keep in mind when writing your first story, is that not everything that someone says will work for you. All right, the writing process is different for everybody. It sounds intuitive, but some of us need to hear that. Not everything I say will work for you, and not everything you do would work for me. And the most important thing, other than finishing your first story, is that you're learning the process that works best for you. Learning your writing process is that's the most important thing you can do to advance your writing. And the only way to do that is through practice. So, thanks for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is there anything else that people should keep in mind when writing the first story, their first draft of their first story? Yeah, thanks for watching.